I was joking a little bit, but the real heroes are the farmers. 1 to 2% of us feeds 100%. That's superhero status. That goes without saying. And then you've got the food security that comes with that stability for a country. The other thing that we do, and you'll notice this as you drive across South Africa, I've seen every corner of South Africa. Like when I was farming here, selling bulls, consulting, when I come back, I know this country. It's an incredible country. And all these small towns, the only thing that keeps them vibrant, the only thing that keeps some form of influence and power and wealth in those countries are the rural communities. Agriculture is what props those small towns up. You take family farms out of the equation, those towns collapse because the money all goes to centralized big cities. So what farming and agriculture does is it decentralizes power. It takes the power away from just one place and it spreads it across the country. This is vital for the strength of a country. I mean, farmers play a much bigger part than just producing food. They decentralize power. And the last thing is national security. You get up into the Kalahari, you get up into the Northern Cape, where your neighbors are different telephone code from you. If there weren't farmers there, you could be invaded and you'd never know. The farmers are witnesses to what's going on in these sparse areas. And the only reason there's roads and roads and telephone lines and cell phone signal is because the farmers are there. So I think it's good that we set the bar there, that there is superhero status within our industry. So no, we don't have to apologize for methane production and all the other things that are getting thrown our way at the moment. I think we just need to keep celebrating what we do. And it's easier said than done. It's not complicated, but it's also not easy. So I've developed a line of thinking called the human flourishing value chain. And we have to preserve our way of life based on the previous slide and our superpower status. But goodness, we have to persevere in order to do that, through floods and droughts and fires, through questionable political decisions, through bad economic ups and downs. No industry perseveres like farmers, agriculturalists have to, but we have to do that in order to preserve our way of life. The key way we do that from the livestock side is what we'll get into more in this discussion, is through productive animals. And I'm going to try and identify what I think makes a more productive animal, because those productive animals create profitable businesses. And when a business is profitable, then that community is prosperous. And then that completes that human flourishing value chain. Because for me, it's about human flourishing. We need humans to flourish. If humans are flourishing, everyone's happy, and everyone lives a better life with more vitality and flourishing. And we play such a key part in that. And we get forgotten about politically because there are few of us. In every country, like there are very few countries where the majority is farmers. And even when they are, like in India, for example, they still get taken advantage of, the farmers, but from another angle. So I guess what I'm trying to do is just represent what we do in an unapologetic way. So let's zone in more on the nuts and bolts of what we do. And I think from a practical standpoint, and from the standpoint of keeping ourselves profitable, I'm going to create an analogy here and a metaphor, which will be like a Roman walled city or Phoenician walled city, and equate that to what it's like to be a farmer and what makes farming profitable. And I think just before I get into that, in breed societies, there's always a balance between your generational farmers and your businessmen that are coming into farming. And both of those are key demographics within a breed society. There's no replacing the experience and the culture that comes from generational farming. And there's a lot of value in the business acumen that comes from your investors, your business people that come into it. But what sometimes is lacking in a breed society is the mutual respect both ways. I've been in a lot of breed societies where the farmers don't want to listen to the business people because what do they know? And the business people come and think that their ceiling that they've reached in business is suddenly now a flaw for their farming enterprise. And that also doesn't work. So there's a lot of cross-pollination that needs to happen between the generational farmers and the business people in these societies, because you both bring such a vitally important bank of knowledge to this equation. So anyway, getting back to that walled city. So basically, the emperor would be in the middle, and all around would be a big wall with several gates pointing in each direction. And there would be gatekeepers at each one of those gates, and those gatekeepers, their job was just to report what was going into the city, whether it's goods or services, whether it's people, and what's going out. Same thing. What trade is going out, what people are going out, what's coming in. And then they would all get together once every so often with the emperor or the king, and they'd tell them what's going on from their gate. So that way, the emperor could see a 360-degree worldview of what's going on in his kingdom or empire. This is just the same as a farm. Farmers are a lot like kings or emperors. We sit in the middle of our farm. That's where our palace is, and no one's going to tell us what to do, except every now and then the bank manager, and every evening our spouses. But there's a big fence around it, and there are gates. Now, these metaphorical gates in a farming enterprise would be genetics, herd management, nutrition, animal health, marketing, record keeping, forage management, felt management, and then human capital or human resources. And all 8 of those gates are equally important. What I mean by that is, if you're missing a gatekeeper at the east gate, that's where you can get invaded through the east gate, and all your assets, your product can run out of the east gate and go missing. So you have to have each one of those 8 gates represented by a gatekeeper. None of us are good at all of that, and that's where you bring in people within your family or within your business that have different talents to what you have, and make sure that all 8 of those gates are paid attention to. Again, this isn't complex or complicated, but it takes a bit of work to make sure that you have all those bases covered. If you don't like history of Europe and the Middle East, then the wheel works just as well for that analogy. It's 8 spokes. They're all similar length. If one is missing or one's longer than the other one, it's a very uncomfortable ride. Then you get a flat tire, and then the machine can't move forwards. So, any questions at that point? Okay, so we're going to get more into the business of cattle themselves, and remember, this only represents 1 or maybe 2 of those divisions, genetics and herd management. So there's 6 other important divisions that need to be paid attention to in order to make your farming enterprise move forward. Yeah, that's why I could never be in sales, is because I can't come to you and say that this bag of furmal is going to change your life. Like, it's a lot more complicated than that. Like with genetics and herd management, you can do that 100% right, but you're only 2/8 or you 1/4 of the way there. So let's talk about profitability when selecting cattle and what traits are more important when it comes to profitability. Again, the sales guys, not Funksioneel. Funksioneel doesn't do this, okay, but the other guys, okay? They'll come to you and they'll knock on your door and they'll say, man, I've just found a bull and he's top 5% for this and top 1% for that, and yeah, you just got to buy him. He's going to change your life. So the thesis or philosophy I want to bring forward is slightly different to that. So there are 2 divisions of traits that we select for. And the one is your profit traits, the ones that keep you in business. that keep you profitable, and then you've got your turnover traits, the things you actually get paid for when you sell your animals. So adaptability would be, for me, the most important of these profit traits. In fact, adaptability to me is the gateway trait that allows cattle to be fertile, allows them to live a long time by being functionally efficient. So if an animal's not adapted to its environment, the climate, to the management practices, to the nutrition available to it, then it won't express any of those other genetics. So adaptability is key. And we see this, unfortunately, all over the world, where very, very high-performing, fancy animals get put into a more trying environment, and they actually can't express any of those genetics because they either tropically degenerate or they just can't meet their energy requirements and needs. So adaptability is key. Okay, functional efficiency, we'll go into that a little later in terms of what it means to be functionally efficient. But that's also, after adaptability, that's a gateway into being able to be fertile and being able to be to have longevity or live a long time. Fertility is absolutely key because if you can't reproduce your product on time every year annually without fail, again, it doesn't matter what other traits an animal possesses. If it's not reproducing itself, there's absolutely no value. And then we'll get into longevity too. And it's a trait that is absolutely essential when it comes to profitability. Then you've got your disco balls, your shiny lights that everyone points to. These are your turnover traits. That's traits like growth, marbling, muscle, weight, milk. Extremely important, but totally relevant if we don't first lay the foundation of those profit traits. So we'll move into a little bit more detail into each one of these, but that's just to lay out a basic philosophy of where I'm going to go with that. So adaptability, you'll see on the top left, there's some Nelore cows and calves. This is in Brazil. It's a breed of cattle that's very adapted to Brazil. There's over 180 million Nelore and Nelore-influenced cattle in Brazil. They perfectly adapted to the humidity and to the heat and to the insects and to the predators and to the hands-off management style up there. And then on the right, you've got that Scottish Highland cow, and that's perfectly adapted to the wind and the rain and the cold and the lack of good nutrition on the hills in Scotland where they outwinter these cattle. But if you put a Nelore cow in Scotland, what would happen over the winter? It would have to eat 4 times as much as a Highland cow in order to be productive, okay? So it just is economically, it's not viable economically because its energy requirements are going to be so high. It's going to spend all its energy in just keeping warm and maintaining itself. The Highland cow in Brazil, probably 20 to 28 days and she's dead, just from tick-borne diseases, flies, predators, pneumonia, her lungs would collapse, heat. So adaptability is really, really key. A lot of my examples are extreme, okay? This is where the animal scientists and geneticists don't like me because they say I use extreme examples. All I'm doing is pointing out that there is a wide spectrum. We need to argue these things when they're close together, but that's just to show that there are differences. And then every 2 animals, one of them is closer to a Nelore and one's closer to a Highland. You just have to identify that to try and find the optimum. Okay, so I'm not trying to play a game. I'm just explaining why I use extremes to explain this stuff. The interesting thing, if you look at where the tropics are, and 70% of the world's cattle are in the tropics, but very little attention from the big North American and European genetic companies is paid to cattle that are tropically adapted. I think there's a huge opportunity in the future, near future, for the focus to go not only on Angus and Holstein cattle, which most of those genetics companies are working at, a little bit of Charolais and, and, Limousin done in Europe and Simmental Fleckvieh. but to actually focus also on what's going on in the tropics, because that's the future. I mean, clearly, look at the numbers say so, and some research and development spent on figuring out what animals work better in the tropics is going to be very, very well spent. So what does it take for an animal to be tropically adapted? There's a lot. It's a very complex list of things. It's not just, again, what you'll notice is I really don't believe in quick fixes for anything. I mean, all of this is a lot more complex, and I think what I'm trying to do is take that complex idea and simplify it, and then make it compelling, and hopefully we can get through that by the end of the day. Body type is important. You know, if you let's take our antelope, for example. You know, if you go into the tropics and you see a Thompson's gazelle, it's very different to a moose. And tropical animals are just a different body type. They're a different structure to your temperate and more Arctic type animals. So we need to be aware of that when we're selecting cattle in the tropics. Hide color. We had a good talk about this morning. Where we are at altitude, you know, when you start going to 1,000 meters and higher, black is a very important color because it can utilize ultraviolet rays and actually turn that into energy. We found that when you've got cattle without pigmentation or cattle that are pink on their extremities, it's quite stressful. That ultraviolet can be really, really stressful. So I don't know how many snow skiers there are, or mountain climbers, or people who like to spend time on water here in the summer at high altitude. If you're not wearing sunglasses, it's tough there. It's not easy to be out there. Now, if we want our cows to perform through their lives and into their teenage years, the least we can do for them is give them a pair of sunglasses to work in. The other thing about that is when it comes to eating poisonous plants, so with the cattle we were breeding at different altitudes, and we had cattle in the desert in Botswana, and we had cattle in the tropics in Mauritius, and then in the Eastern Cape up in the high country, is anything that's not pigmented or has white on the extremities, when they eat a poisonous plant, the photosensitivity is harsh. If you don't get them into the shade immediately, you can lose them through that. So there's a huge benefit in black and being good, well pigmented at altitude. Which, when you look at the Drakensberger breed and where all the breeders are, that didn't happen by accident. I mean, it actually makes a lot of sense. The slick coat is a vitally important attribute for two things. The one is for reflecting light, and the other one is for getting rid of parasites, external parasites. And so that keeps the animals cooler, but also stops them from getting too many insects on them. The Indicus influenced cattle, and I think one of the most interesting things when I talk Indicus, Sangha, like the Sangha cattle are, give or take, around 50% Indicus. I know the websites haven't all been updated, but when we started doing genome testing on all the breeds, that Sangha is probably a combination of cattle that came from the Indus Valley in India 10 to 15,000 years ago, mixed with the African Bos Taurus cattle, and that's how the Sangha was created. Then your Zenge, which is like the Afrikander, your Boron, those type of breeds, that's Indicus on Sangha. So they go more towards like a three-quarter Indicus, quarter Taurus. So this is going to get interesting now. So when I talk about the Indicus traits, you've got them in your cattle. Okay. Even Senepal on their website, they're pure Bos Taurus. But when you do the genome test, there's quite a lot of Indicus in those Senepal cattle that came through the zoo cattle and the Indicus cattle that were in the Caribbean at that time. So maybe the Ndama in West Africa, but there are very few heat-tolerant, tropically adapted cattle that have no Indicus in them. So these subcutaneous muscles, the more Indicus you get in your cattle, they can shake off an insect just on one spot. So if they land on their ribs, they can shake that animal off without having to use their tongue or their tail, whereas pure Bos Taurus cattle have to use their tongue and tail to get those insects off. Sebum excretion, there's a lot more sebum that's excreted through the Indicus influence cattle, and that sebum's important. When you work Sangha cattle or Zenge cattle or Indicus cattle, there's a different smell in the crawl. There's a different smell in the race, and that's that sebum that's been excreted, and it acts as like a sunscreen, and that's what helps reflect, but then it also acts as an insect repellent to these cattle. And then surface area, guys, I know there are a lot of thoughts out there, and there's thoughts from really well-known and well-respected cattlemen that I respect myself in trying to tighten the skin up on these cattle. But extra skin is like a radiator. The more surface area skin you've got, the more sweat glands you've got. And the more sweat glands you've got, the more you can dissipate heat. It's a radiator. So when you tighten that skin up too much, you're actually losing the ability for those animals to radiate heat through those sweat glands. Indicus influence cattle have more sweat glands per square inch than Taurus cattle. So all of these allow for tropical, or help with tropical adaptability. Again, it's complex. We're just trying to make it simple and compelling. Functional efficiency. So we've got two examples of what we often measure in terms of efficiency. It's your feed efficiency tests. I know that the phase C tests that go on in South Africa, there's similar tests in other countries. So basically, this is when you measure how many kilograms of feed it takes to put on a kilogram of weight on your animals. This is very effective, but it's definitely more designed for animals that are fed in contained spaces. This trait is antagonistic to efficiency on pasture or veld. Okay, so your leaner, later maturing cattle will definitely be more efficient in a phase C type environment. This is really good for the feedlotters. The cattle that are early maturing, easy fleshing, a little bit more moderate framed, fuller bodied, those are the cattle that will do really well on the veld, and they'll be a little too efficient to be as efficient as the feedlots want them to be. So as long as we understand we're dealing with two different sets of traits here. The cow-calf efficiency, that's just when we measure at weaning, 6 to 8 months old, for example, what percentage of a cow's body weight she's weaning in her calf. Now, functional efficiency is what I'm more interested in than either of those things. Okay, the functional efficiency is several things. We can also call it balance. I think balance is a term that we can use interchangeably. Balance is also a term that we use quite flippantly. It's a term like sustainability or equity. We just throw those words out there. So for me, what balance means is several things. Number one, it's physiological balance. Okay, and remember, every time I say balance, I mean functional efficiency. Physiological balance, where all the body parts fit together appropriately and in the right proportions. We're going to have some animals come out for a little discussion later. And then you have your endocrinological balance. So that when the endocrine system is functioning correctly, releasing hormones at the right levels, and that expresses itself in the animal's phenotype, you've got a balance between muscle and fat. Okay, muscle, the product that we produce, and fat, the energy it takes to produce that product. So in females, because estrogen makes fat, we want a fat muscle balance. Fat females with some muscle. And then with the bulls, because testosterone makes muscle, we want a muscle-fat balance. We want bulls with some muscle shape and tone, but they must also have some cover on them, because again, that's energy. And when we get to the fertility slide, we'll see why that fat is so important. And that's functional efficiency. What's the fourth one? Hormonal balance. Bulls that are masculine, with even some coarseness, some grunt, some punch to them, and that extra muscle shape and tone that are totally different shape to the females. And then with females, we need femininity, females with ladylike qualities, faces like princesses, bums like cooks. That's a nicely balanced female. That's functional efficiency. It's very, very important that we realize that these males and females need to look totally different from each other because that's a key indicator of fertility, and we'll get to that a little bit later. So with fertility, okay, so let's start off with this. It's much more important than growth or any other trait. It's enabled by adaptability and functional efficiency. There are two traits that allow for fertility better than anything else, and the one is ease of fleshing, and the other one is hormonal balance. Okay, so if you've got a female that is feminine and easy fleshing, she's fertile. If you've got a bull that's masculine and full-bodied and easy fleshing, he's fertile. Okay, high inherent body condition plus hormonal balance equals fertility. Again, it's not easy, but it's simple. Okay, to move forward with it, which means that we can select for it. Okay, because both those traits are highly heritable. It's highly heritable to have hormonal balance. It's highly heritable to have ease of fleshing or easy fattening ability. Well, there's a lot of pushback to this, especially the feed companies. They love telling us you can't select for fertility, but you can open a Furmol bag or a Molotech bag or the other feed company bags for it. Of course it's going to help. I mean, because it's going to allow better body condition in those animals, but it's a lot cheaper to breed that fertility into your cattle rather than to go and buy feed to feed it into them. Some very well documented, some very well lettered, great reputation animal scientists and academics that still stand by the fact that fertility has low heritability. It's hard to breed for. It's 10% heritability. But that doesn't really make sense. Like, just think about your own herds back home, okay? Are any of you in the sheep or goat business? Wow, that's not a lot of you, eh? Okay, that's amazing. Okay, well, anyway, in the sheep or goat business, when the guys buy rams, they want to know what the used twinning rates are like. And some of them want twins because they've got green feed and lands and they can manage twins. And the other ones don't want twins because they don't have green feed and they can't manage it. But what does that tell you? That fertility is highly heritable, right? Because otherwise, why would they be bothering with it? We know that if you go back to your farm and you put 100 Holstein cows together with 100 Drakensberger cows, together with 100 Belgian blue cows, you know which 100 cows are going to give you the most number of weaned calves out of those sample groups at the end of say a 3 or 4 year trial. You know, because it's heritable. Now again, that's an extreme example. If you want to hear an animal scientist scream, you must just use that example on them, because it's different breeds and they're different purposes. Genes don't know that they're different breeds. Like these traits, like these are all just cows, okay? And sometimes you have to use those extreme examples to show how heritable these traits actually are. Fertility is highly heritable. And I'll tell you, and I don't want to embarrass Paki here, but one of the best analogies I've ever heard on selecting for fertility is Paki. And I've stolen it from him. I stole it. I'll pay you back tonight with a tequila and soda. But, and sorry if I get this wrong, but the way I understood it is that if you breed for fertility and against the negative outliers of all the other traits, you end up with a balanced fertile animal. Is that right? Okay. That's just pure common sense. I mean, that makes absolutely 100% sense. So breeding for fertility, identifying which bulls have sperm at a young age, which females come into estrus at a young age, which animals are easy fleshing, like within your yearling group, the fattest animals are going to be your fertile animals. The heifers that are the most feminine at a year old are going to be feminine and fat, they're going to be your fertile animals. The bulls that look like bulls at a year old with some cover on them, they're going to be fat cover, not hair cover. They're going to be your fertile animals. And I think that this was proven. There's a Nelore herd in Brazil called Nazaraí that I was just blown away with. You know those Nelore cattle, anything just think of a Brahmin, okay? That's a little bit wilder than a Brahmin, a little bit bigger than a Brahmin, a little bit later maturing than a Brahmin, a little bit higher jumping than a Brahmin. Now, if you think of all those traits, that's a Nelore. Now, Nazarai, about 30 years ago, they started by semen testing all their bulls at 8 months old, just for live sperm. Okay, just as long as there's live sperm. They didn't do anything with it, they just looked. And if there was live sperm, those bulls were set aside as potential herd bulls, stud bulls. And the females all got exposed to calve at 2. Okay. The first year, I think 6% of their heifers calved at 2. Now it's just practice. They do that. Most of their herd calves at 2, and their bull mothers are all cows that calved at 2, and then every year after that. Now I know that Uberaba in Brazil is pretty good conditions. Okay, I mean it's hot and humid, but there's strong grass and there's good nutrition. So I'm not saying that this can happen everywhere, or should happen everywhere. But the fact that they could do that with Nelore means that we need to at least talk about it and at least start discussing what they did in order to achieve that. Because honestly, without fertility, we can't really move forward and be practical with it. There's an Australian guy I met with 6 weeks ago. He runs CPC, 9.5 million acres. What's that? 4.5 million hectares in Australia. 300,000 cows. He's got 6,000 boron cows and 30,000 Brahman cows. They calve at 2. Okay. Again, Queensland's there's some really good land there. So I'm not saying that because I know where you guys farm. The tortoises get tears in their eyes. It's so sour in some of those places. So I'm not saying it's possible everywhere, but I'm saying that the discussion needs to at least happen as to maybe where we can tweak to move more into a fertility type thing. Now, I've driven, like when you drive from here to Mozambique or here to Durban, yeah, some of those cows, the back legs are off the ground when they're taking a bite of some of that grass. You know? It's tough. I know it is. I'm not saying it's as easy as Uberaba or as Queensland, but the fact that they're doing that, you tell a Brahmin breeder in the Western Free State that he can calve at 2, you'll think you're crazy. Western Free State's not hard. It's easy to be a cow in the Western Free State. So anyway, so that's just to plant a few seeds. The way you water it is up to you, but I'm just saying that these things are out there. In the Eastern Cape, when I was little growing up, there were guys on the other side of town from us called the Winterberg that said it was impossible for a cow to calve every year there. They calved them every second year, okay? Because it was too sour and too cold. If you tell their sons now that their fathers were saying that, they think you're crazy. There's no way our fathers said that. But, I mean, so this will be the conversation for the future and how we navigate fertility. Longevity is important because it's so expensive to keep replacing females. You know, to have passengers on your farm is expensive, and the less cows you have to replace every year, the better. It takes a lot to get a cow into production. You know, it's like a hotel where you only start paying on the 4th night. It's expensive. So, and what longevity, you know, obviously it's how long the teeth last for. It's the skeletal structure. It's the quality of the udder or the testicles in bulls and that foot structure. And we'll get into foot structure later, but I think a lot of us spend a lot of time looking at animals' feet. But if you think about when a calf is born, and you guys have lots of calves, there are not many small breeders in the Drakensbergers. That's what I like about you guys. You've got big herds. When those calves are born, they've all got good feet. There are no skewed toes when the calves are born. There are no flat heels when the calves are born. So it's in the skeletal structure, and we'll start getting onto that when the cows come in here. It's shoulder angles, it's hip angles, it's hind leg angles. All that pressure changes the shape of the feet. That's all longevity. So I think it's important that we start taking a good look at skeletal structure. And then longevity from a practical standpoint is fertility. Like when the cow skips, you process her, so keeping them fertile and having longevity traits is key. This is so important, and in the circles that I run in, I see a lot of the sexual monomorphism where the bulls and the females look very, very similar. The bulls are, in the big popular herds, you drive into those herds, and these are the performance herds, in inverted commas. You drive into those herds, and the bulls and the females almost look the same. You can't find the bull in the herd. The bulls are a little bit feminine, and the females are a little bit masculine. And all that's happened there is that these breeders have been selecting for maximums on all the growth and muscle and performance traits instead of optimums. And they've been prolonging those growth hormones. So they're making the long bones grow up and out for long enough that they can get those cattle big, and they're focusing on packing muscle onto the cattle, including the females. They talk about powerful females. And I remember at university when I was scouting and looking for a wife, I definitely wasn't looking for the powerful female. But somehow this seems to be a thing where the guys start talking about how much power the females have got. So when you propagate those growth hormones and you delay the ossification when the bones stop, you're delaying the sex hormones or reproduction from happening. And you can go into a herd and you know immediately if these guys are what they're focusing on, because when the bull doesn't quite look like a bull and the female doesn't quite look like a female, then they're not selecting for reproduction. They're selecting for growth, and they're selecting for carcass. Sexual dimorphism, you'll see in the bottom pictures, now the bull and the female, same genetics, look totally different. That's a mammalian phenomenon. That's what mammals are supposed to be like, where the size, the shape, the attributes are completely different to each other. And that sexual dimorphism comes simply from breeding for reproduction. And when you breed for fertility or reproduction, it's amazing how everything else comes together and fits together. It fixes all the little things you try and breed for individually. They just come together naturally. Your bulls have muscle, your females have good udders, they're well fleshed, just from breeding for that reproduction. Because remember, it's hormonal balance, so your bulls are going to have testosterone, which makes muscle. Your females are going to be easy fleshing because estrogen makes fat. And then it's going to be that inherent body condition that keeps them reproducing. But that easy fleshing or easy fattening isn't only good for reproduction, which it is, but because it's a key ingredient, but it's also good for maintenance. I mean, your animals through the droughts or through the winter, it's the fat ones that keep going through there. And it's a better eating experience. When that steak hits the plate, it's got flavor, I laugh when I give these talks in Europe. They say, no, we like lean beef. They do, but then they put a sauce on that beef that's full of fat. So flavor comes from fat, and even I know that the Dutch and the Belgians, goodness, they'll serve you a steak that you need a sword to cut through it. But then they pour all kinds of sauce on it to bring that flavor. With growth or weight, again, we've just got to avoid those extremes, guys, like Picky's analogy. So you breed against low weaning weight. You don't have to breed for high weaning weight. There's a balance, and this is for most breeders and most cattle in most situations. All of these examples will have a reason for these cattle to exist, which we'll get into some of it later. But the vast majority of cattle in the vast majority of places, the vast majority of management systems, you want to be somewhere in the middle of that Chianina bull and the miniature Galloway heifer. And muscle's the same. Here are these high myostatin carrying Belgian blue bulls. Now, what happens with these cattle is they just breed them as extreme as possible, and we'll get to why they're doing that in Belgium soon. And then Wagyu, which, again, there's a place for these cattle in certain niche markets, but for most people in most places, we're going to need muscle somewhere between those two examples. And milk is similar too. That Belgian blue cow, again, she's dry, but you can see if she was wet, there's not going to be much milk or udder there, just with the phenotype that she's got. There's an example of hormonal balance and inherent body condition. She's got no hormonal balance and no fleshing ability. Now the cow, the Holstein cow on the right, amazing udder, tremendous amount of milk, but in a beef system, she's just not going to calve more than once, and she'll be out the system because her energy will be going into producing milk, not into reproducing or to fighting disease. So the milk, again, we want somewhere right in the middle of those two examples. Marbling's the same. You know, your productive, functional cattle that are fertile and adapted, they do marble well if you give them a chance to. Unfortunately, you know, in the South African system, when we're killing cattle as young as we are, there's not really opportunity for them to express marbling. They're too young and they're fed for too short. So unless you growing your cattle out yourselves and you're finishing them yourselves, you custom processing them with an amount of time and at an age that can express marbling, then okay, it's worth actually paying attention to it. Good news, though, is that if you are breeding functionally efficient cattle that are fertile, they will marble enough if you give them opportunity to. So with marbling, under any circumstance, again, for most people in most places, most scenarios, you want to be in between those two. There's absolutely a business model for that Wagyu marbling in a lot of the elite centers around the world, but we can't do that for all beef production. It'll just become unaffordable. What size should a cow be? If you guys had to guess, what size is the average Drakensberger cow behind us here, weight-wise? Just don't all shout at once. How much? Okay, let's say 400. Now, this question gets asked everywhere, and the system I've tried to come up with for the customers that I consult with is one that definitely determines what size your cow should be. And now, again, I hate sounding like a politician, but it's different depending on your environment and your climate and your nutrition and objectives, etc. But this is a pretty good way to get to that right-sized cow. And I feel like I'm preaching to the choir now because I think you guys all do most of this or all of it already. The first thing is appropriate nutrition and management. You know, not spoiling your cows, but also not starving them. You know, giving them the keys to the pantry is a disaster, but also when you've got cows and we had guys in the Eastern Cape, we wool and mohair farmers, and a lot of the guys will say, no, we don't even look after our cattle, they take care of themselves, and then you go there and they look like bicycles with blankets on them, you know. And it's crazy. What other asset in the world would you say, you know, like I've got some commercial property in Joburg, but I don't look after it. No, it looks after itself. I mean, it's insane. Like there has to be a balance between the keys to the pantry and actually just, they're not wildlife. So I think finding the good and progressive commercial guys in your area and seeing what nutritional programs those guys are on that are doing it at scale, it'll be a good indicator of nutrition. And then finding at what age these cows must calve. So let's use 36 months as an example. Let's say if they're calving at 3, so that would be 39 months. Cut off anything after that you don't keep within your system, or definitely not within the system that you're keeping replacements from. That maybe goes into a speculator holding pen. The third thing is to conceive within a breeding season. Now, some guys will be 90, some guys take it all the way down to 45. Eventually, you'll be surprised at how quickly you can get to 45 and how most of your cows will actually calve within that period once you've got your type right. But to have a breeding season. These numbers aren't important. It's the system that's important. You put your own numbers in there and let the data work itself out. Got to do this annually and on time. Like cattle that aren't calving every year, there isn't a business model that'll pencil out for that. And then to establish a minimum weaning weight at 7 months. So there is a minimum that you'll tolerate on your farm and in your environment at that age. And you'll need to do that yourselves, but in some areas it's going to be 280 and some areas it's going to be 180. It depends on your climate and environment. But what that stops us doing is getting our cows too small. And you can get too small, because when you go into sheep and goat territory, then they're going to whip us, because they have them 2 at a time and 3 times in 2 years. So you want to keep them as large ruminants. Then the calf needs to be at least 45% of the cow's weight at 7 months. And I think 45 to 55 is a sweet spot. You don't want to get too much higher than that, because then some of that energy starts going into milking and getting taken away from actual reproduction of that cow and fighting disease, etc. So I think 45 to 55 is a sweet spot. Now, if you do this every year, within a few years, not even 4 to 5 years, within a few years, all your cows are exactly the right size for your farm and your environment. And then you've found a factory that's the appropriate size for the product that you're putting out there. Line breeding or highly strategized inbreeding, guys, this is, especially in your breed, I think it's extremely important that this is done in the right way. The breed societies are terrified of this. In some countries, they want to maximum at 7% inbreeding coefficient, others it's 12%. And I do understand why. And this is another place where the animal scientists come and find me afterwards to try and teach me. I understand why it hasn't worked in the past. Because if you line breeding with an animal that you're selecting for growth and performance, of course you're going to lose fertility. Because you're line breeding with a subfertile animal to begin with. Now you're compounding those genetics. Then the logical outcome is an even more subfertile animal. But if you're line breeding with the philosophy we're talking about now, where you're maximizing fertility and optimizing all the other traits, where you're not breeding for outliers, you're breeding for the middle, when you find that animal to line breed with, or that line to line breed with, all you're doing is compounding desirable genetics, and you're getting a more consistent product, a product that you can put out to the market, whether it's for genetics or for beef, that is predictable. And I mean, any industry, no matter what industry you're in, you want the cup of coffee that you got from the coffee shop to taste like the previous one that you enjoyed. This takes the variation and the guesswork out of it. And when you sell this to your commercial guys, especially when it comes to crossbreeding, you're giving them an absolute genetic explosion because of how predictable and prepotent your lines are. I was in Finland in November, and I'll put up this slide, and goodness, the Europeans hate line breeding. And I know why. And I said to them, you don't like line breeding because of your royal families. You see all the problems that come out in your royal families. And I said, the problem isn't the line breeding, it's that you started with the wrong people. If they'd started with the right people, it wouldn't have been such a big issue. In Tanzania now, this weekend, I said the same thing to them. If you take the Masai Mara and the Serengeti, that great migration of wildebeest and zebra, there are 3 million, more or less, animals there. That number doesn't get less, okay? But there's lions and leopards and cheetahs and crocodiles and poachers, and that number stays at 3 million. And none of those animals are not functionally efficient, and they're all exactly the same. And can you imagine how line-bred and inbred those animals are? I mean, as brother, sister, father, mother, continuously, because they're just moving slowly together. I mean, it's logical that they're extremely line-bred. So the animal scientists are not wrong at all according to how they've been line breeding with animals, that they're line breeding with animals that are extreme for growth, extreme for milk, extreme for muscle, instead of line breeding with animals that are fertile, long-living, functionally efficient and adapted, and then avoiding negative outliers and all the other traits. Guys, this is logical. This is not, I don't think this is something that we need to step back at. Evaluating structure and phenotype, you know what, I'm going to get, when we've got animals in the ring, I'll touch on that. Again, we've spoken a lot about high inherent body condition, ease of fleshing, easy fattening type of cattle. So what these cattle do, and for me, I feel comfortable now. I'm not feeling in danger because the cattle behind me are what I'm talking about. These are easy fleshing cattle. They're cattle with high inherent body condition, and whoever your selectors are doing a tremendous job. I walked through them a little earlier today. So what do these cattle do? Compared to the leaner, later maturing cattle, these cattle come into estrus earlier in their lives. The bulls are more fertile earlier in their lives. These cattle are non-selective grazers, so they put their heads down and they graze. Like I said, I've driven through a lot of the places where your guys' cattle are. There's no pudding there. It's just the main course. They've got better temperaments. Your easy fleshing, earlier maturing cattle have definitely got a better temperament than your leaner, later maturing cattle. And Oregon State University did an interesting study where they likened poor fertility to poor temperament. Logical, right? But they needed to do that to show it, and they did show it. Their foraging ability, them being non-selective grazing, like I mentioned, is one of their traits. And then there's eating experience. It's a better eating experience. The carcass quality goes up when you have that fleshing ability. Especially when you're harvesting them as young as you do, that becomes even more important because now you've got that extra fat cover. So staying, I mean, you're going to think I've left the reservation, but I haven't. Staying within this idea of balance and of human flourishing and how it applies to our farms. Forbes magazine, they publish a top 10, actually they rank all the countries first to last, but this was their top 10 happiest countries last year, and it's indexed through a whole variety of different things. And if you read through those countries, from Finland going down to New Zealand, there are a lot of similarities there. The first one I didn't mention on the left, which is quite interesting, is of the top 6 countries for happiness, 5 of them are also in the top 6 for milk consumption, which was fascinating. I think that may be just a huge coincidence, but it was quite interesting that 5 of the top 6 happiest countries in the world are also in the top 6 for milk consumption. On the left, these are the 3 things that all 10 of these top 10 happiest countries have. The first thing is they're free markets, okay? So the people decide what the value of a good and a service is. This seems obvious to a lot of us, but there are a lot of countries where that isn't the case. Okay, so that keeps those countries happy. The second thing is they maximize energy. Okay, so whether that energy is wind or solar or fossil fuels or nuclear, they don't hold back on it, they maximize it, okay? And the third thing is they've liberated women. So let's go through these things if it was a farm. The first thing is free markets. I think within our breed societies, the more choice you give to your breeders to be scientists, to use their farms as a laboratory, to test genetics, to prove and disprove things, to test new combinations. That free market idea definitely will move your breed forward. Because remember, worldwide, the cattle industry has been through a lot of waves. We wanted them belt high and then sky high, and then we went for extreme low birth weight, and then it was all carcass. Then it was the whole genomically enhanced train. Now I see that diving deep into the methane emissions train. Every time we've gone into those waves, what saves the breed are the breeders that weren't doing exactly what the breed society told them to do. So I think the more open you leave it, you're going to need those breeders that are sticking to the middle, that are just breeding adapted, functional, fertile, long-living cattle. Okay, so give your breeders a little bit of freedom. The second thing is to maximize energy. So we've all got energy in our farms in terms of human capital. So whatever warm body you've got on your farm, maximize it. Like allow that talent to come to fruition. And it might be in an area that you didn't even think was necessary on a farm, but as long as you let them run with that energy. And the third thing is liberating women. You think there's some very rich countries that aren't on this list, and it's because their women aren't educated and they're not allowed to drive, and it's the craziest thing. Obviously, from a moral standpoint, it makes sense that they're not flourishing because they haven't liberated women. But from an economic standpoint, they took they're only utilizing 50% of their population. 50% of the population isn't being given that opportunity. So they can only run at 50% of their potential. But it's even worse than that, because the other 50% they're not utilizing is raising 100% of the next generation. So I think if you look at how these countries have liberated women within our farming enterprises, there's a lot of good that comes from the girls. You know, I found, especially my clients in the US, things like attention to detail, record keeping, like little touches that guys are not very good at. The testosterone, I think, burns that all up. A lot of my female clients are exceptional at a lot of that stuff that the guys can't do. So I think we need to fully utilize all of our energy. Yeah, so it comes back to balance, guys. Not too much of anything, but enough of everything. The Swedes, does anyone speak Swedish here? Yeah, that's surprising at a Drakensberger national sale. No Swedish speakers. So when I say lagom, you don't know if I'm pronouncing it right or wrong, but the Swedes have got a word and they live by it. Like, and a lot of the Scandinavian countries have a similar type of philosophy. Whether they're eating a meal or driving a car or living in a house or getting a job, it's just the right amount. The right amount of food on their plate, the right house for their family, the right car that's comfortable enough but will get them from A to B. And I think if we took this Swedish philosophy and put it into our cattle, that's where the profitability and sustainability, because sustainability is profitability. If you're not profitable, you can't even think of sustainability. So there are a lot of opportunities, and I know, goodness, there's challenges. So like we read the paper today about the foot and mouth that's just been found at Karen, and there's a lot of challenges. But the opportunities are there, and they're good. And from a macro scale, just the growing demand of red meat consumption worldwide is amazing. You know, in the US led the charge on meat-free Mondays and lab-grown beef and meatless burgers. And still year on year, incrementally, there's more and more red meat being consumed in the US. The more developing countries, they didn't even get into any of that, and red meat consumption is really going strong. China, even with their downward economic, they're in a little bit of a lull economically at the moment, but the one thing they didn't compromise on was food. You know, they got into eating a little bit more red meat, and when they had to tighten their belts economically, they didn't give up that red meat. They've kept it. This is all a good sign for us, and I know, like, the last couple of years have been quite tough with the South African markets, but long-term, supply and demand has to figure its way out. I know the Middle East is desperately looking for new suppliers because, you know, Australia's turned the tap off with their sheep, and they're desperately looking for new suppliers. These markets are going to come up. The demand is too great for it not to be used. I remember in 2012, I was at the Bradford World Congress in Paraguay talking, and this guy was showing statistically that in Paraguay, Uruguay, and Argentina, I think they eat 60 kilos of beef per year, per person. And for a meal, if they were going to budget for a meal, they budgeted 500 grams of beef per person, including women and children. Now they take 3 or 4 hours to eat it. You know, it's a long celebratory process, but it's a lot of beef. China at that stage was eating 3 kilos of beef per person per year. Okay, and they've doubled it since then, and they're going to double it again. What they're going to need for this next doubling is a cattle industry the size of Brazil to supply them, which you can't make another. Brazil's got 220 million cattle. You can't make another Brazil. So again, this is supply and demand. And what we found is as soon as the demand gets strong, the sanitary requirements and the health requirements and like the disease status of each country becomes less and less important, because no government survives a hungry a hungry population. The other thing that I really like pushing is that we're breeding humanely produced animal protein that's also sustainable. We found a way to make these cows sustainable, and they're humanely produced. You know, and I'm using terms that the elite cities use. Okay, I'm not saying I'm buying into this, but this is the talk that's out there, and I think we must use that. It's humane and sustainable. You know, that's a white-tailed deer, but let's say there was a kudu there. You know, a kudu is extremely humanely produced, but you're not going to feed 8 billion people with venison or wild-caught salmon. You know, on the other side, what is sustainable and you could feed the whole world with is chickens and pigs, because you can mass produce them quite easily. But then your elite urban centers are going to say that it's not really humanely produced. Look, I eat I'm equal opportunity. I don't mind consuming any of these products, but from a marketing and messaging standpoint, I think we're in a very strong position when we push the humane and sustainable aspect. The challenges, subsidies already have shown. When I started using this slide, the EU hadn't done it yet, but they've already got to this point. So I get a lot of demand for these miniature Highland and miniature Galloway calves or embryos. And the reason they want them is they get subsidized per head per year. So if they can have miniature Galloway and miniature Highland, they can have more than 2 times the amount of cattle on their property, and they get subsidized per head. But so what it creates is it's a false market. Already though, when you start getting subsidized, then you're giving the government information on every cow that you've got. So when the EU in Brussels and all the geniuses decide they must cut their population of cattle in Europe by 30%, they know how many cattle you've got on your farm. They also know the names of all those cattle on your farm. So the hook that pulls you up the hill is the same hook that pulls you down. And I really believe that if you're living and working and farming in a country where the government is not paying much attention to you, that's one of the best positions you can be in. Because distance from the government stops the quotas and the subsidies and all those kind of things from happening. There's a lot of freedom the further you move away from the elected officials. And the carbon tax thing too. Now they're going to start taxing the people that were subsidizing, and they know who's got what. Quotas is tough too. You know, when in Belgium, for example, if they tell you can only have 18 cows, human nature is going to make those the most extreme 18 cows possible. And we see that with those Belgian blues. And then you get a situation where these cows can't calve naturally. It's C-sections every time. The maximum number of calves, a C-sections a cow can have is 3. So their cows are calved 3 times. I mean, there's no way that that's profitable. This Brahman bull was in Cuba. I did their national show a few years ago. As you can see, he's not the best you've seen, but he's also not the worst. I mean, he's just okay. They sold this bull for $400 US the next day, so it's about 7,500 rand. And like, I was surprised that the guy had let it go, and then I realized that it's just left pocket, right pocket. It's the Castros moving their own money around. Communism really hurts the ability for cattle or any livestock genetics or any industry to move forward, because there's no incentive to do better because you don't get rewarded for it. And socialism, that picture at the bottom, that's in the Pampas down in Argentina, one of the best areas in the world to raise cattle. And what happened there is in the early 2000s, Christina Kirchner, president at that time, flirted quite hard with socialism. And what she did is she banned 95% of beef exports to make beef cheaper in Buenos Aires and in the cities for the poorer people. So the farmers, they weren't going to sell cheap beef off the Pampas, so they turned that Pampas into soybeans for China. And Argentina went from 60 million to 50 million cattle in those 8 years. And what did the price of beef do? It went higher than it had ever been, supply and demand, right? So Socialism, when you start playing socially engineering anything, cattle, people, it's not a good outcome. So this is, like we spoke earlier, just free market economies and allowing the people to decide the value of goods and services. And I mean, you guys, I know from when I was farming in the Eastern Cape, one of the worst things that happened was minimum wage. Because what happened? Minimum wage became maximum wage, okay? And we had guys working for us that were going to be 4 or 5 times over minimum wage. But we also had guys that would, young boys that would bring in, like I'm talking like 10, 11 to 15-year-old guys who'd bring in the cows every night for milking and take them out the next day. And we had to pay them minimum wage. Impossible. So what happened? Because they weren't allowed to work, they weren't doing anything, then they moved to town, and like any teenager, they get bored, and one thing leads to a next, and it's a social disaster. Who is a government, any government, to tell 2 people what the value of their services are? This sounds extreme, but it's just logical, it's common sense. Like, the more open we keep these discussions, I think the better for everyone. This is another example of a government intervention in the US that really caused a bit of a crisis there. So the sugar farmers here in the 70s, they lobbied the government to tariff sugar from Brazil and the Caribbean and to make sugar strong in the US. And at that same time, the mealie farmers, they were getting subsidized, okay? So they started getting subsidized, and so mealies became really, really cheap and sugar became expensive. And then they started getting a byproduct from mealies called high fructose corn syrup, and that replaced sugar, and it's in everything. Everything. Bread, bacon. Like, if you go to the supermarket, there's sugar-free bacon, the one that hasn't got high fructose corn syrup. So in America, when you eat bacon, it's stiff, it's straight, it's like it's full of sugar. Okay? And that was a disaster, because mealies are so cheap, because they're so heavily subsidized, they run through everything. They run through the chickens, they run through the pigs, they run through the cattle, and they run through the people. And if you look at the American population from a health standpoint, end of 1970, early 1980 till now, it's 2 different people groups, 2 different species. You put them together, you can't even recognize that it was the same species. But also, there's some things that people are doing from 1980 till now that aren't like it was before 1970. There was no such thing as school shootings and all these such activities before 1980. Getting back to the endocrine system, everything we put in our bodies or in our animals' bodies comes out both physiologically, but also remember the brain is a muscle too. So the way the food we give our animals also is going to affect the way in which they respond from a temperament standpoint. This is a typical picture of a Texas beef herd. You see those Red Angus Simmental type cattle with that oil well in the background. A lot of these guys, when you ask them what their carrying capacity is, it's about 100 cows to an oil well is what their carrying capacity is. But it's created an artificial market. So what it's done is, because there's that money coming from oil, the type of animal that they can raise isn't really genuinely adapted to that environment. Okay? The other thing that they don't like is when you remind them how subsidized the cattle industry is in the US, because it's subsidized by oil, right? It's not that different in South Africa. There's a lot of our industry that's subsidized, okay? I know there was another breed that I was speaking at last year, and I asked the crowd how many of them make their money from livestock. It was maybe 15% of the crowd, okay? Which means that your cattle operation is subsidized, okay? And I've got nothing against that. I think it's wonderful. Like, more money, rather that go into the cattle industry than into yachts and racehorses. I'd rather that stayed in the cattle industry. But what I would love to encourage is that let's still produce cattle as though they have to make money for themselves. Like, enjoy the extra money that comes in, but those cattle still need to perform as though they were not subsidized. Because you can subsidize good cattle too. They don't have to be bad cattle. You can subsidize the good ones. Where I'm going to with this is like in the US, and it'll be a little similar in South Africa, a little different in some ways. So you've got the value chain, okay? Now the cow-calf producers, that's the farmers, the primary producers, they are told by the feedlots what type of animal the feedlots like to feed, okay? So they're breeding for the feedlot. So they're subsidizing the feedlot, right? Their male calves all end up in the feedlot. The one thing they're forgetting is that 50% of their client is themselves, because they have to keep the heifers, okay? So if you've got two client bases, the people who keep use your heifers and those that feed your males, your steers, why would you give preference to the customer that is not yourself? Surely you'd give preference to the customer that is yourself, because you're the one who has to live with that issue. So where I'm getting to with this is that instead of subsidizing the feedlots, the feedlots are fine, they find a way to make money. Rather, let charity begin at home and find animals that make a profit for you specifically, okay? The feedlots in the US, this is where it's a little different to here. The packers, the processors, the abattoirs, they want those carcasses fed to about 180 to 200 days, okay? And they're killing those cattle at about 1,500 pounds now, so say 700 kilos. That's their slaughter weight, okay? Now, you go, and they're wanting about 8/10 of an inch of fat. Now, we can do the cent, but it's a lot of fat, okay? Now, you know it's very expensive to feed fat onto cattle, okay? The feedlots were making money at 150 days, but from the 151st day onwards, now they're starting to eat away at their profit. When you get to about 180, especially to 200 days, now they're breaking even and losing, okay? So what's happened is the feedlots are now subsidizing the packers, okay? The retailers, so the equivalent of a Pick and Pay or Checkers or Woolies, are making 1%, okay? So that means if you go and buy a steak for $16, they make 16 cents. That's what's different to here. So it's more like an anchor product. You go in there and you buy toothpaste and toothbrush and everything, and they put markup on that, but the beef, it's just an anchor product. Okay, so retailers make 1%, feedlots about 3 to 4%, the backgrounders or what they call stockers also 3 to 4%, cow-calf guys 2 to 3 to 4%. The packers, the processors, are making 87% of the available 100% profit, and they're owning those cattle for between 2 and 3 days, okay? So my cry, and this is not totally different in South Africa, but it's a little bit different metric, is just let's work on cattle that make money for us now. The customer's always right, correct? Not really. Sometimes the customer's right. So in India, there's a phenomenon where on the sides of the street, there'll be poor people begging, okay? And because of the Hindu faith and because people are generous, they give money to those people begging, okay? So the customer is the person giving the money, okay? The person begging, they're providing the service, they're making the customer feel good. There's a premium if that beggar's holding a child, okay? The biggest premium is if that child is maimed or blind or has something physically wrong with them. So now there are little gangs that maim those children, that blind those children, that then they go hold those children on the street and they get top dollar for that, okay? So what has that got to do with cattle? I don't think that we must handicap our cow herds because the customer wants a certain product. I think we need to find a balance where our cow herds make money for the family farms and keep the farmers on the farms, keep those communities prospering. And like I said, feedlots, packers and retailers know how to make money for themselves. They're pros at that. We're the ones that maybe are subsidizing them too heavily. Sorry, so on that happy note, oh, it's not that happy, it's the next thing now. Okay, so another thing that makes it so difficult to farm cattle or livestock profitably are these wars and political unrest. In the last few years, I don't know why I find myself in all these places. I've been to Ukraine twice, Russia, Palestine, Iran. I was supposed to go back to Iran now in November, so I hope things are a little quieter when I get there now. So yeah, Israel, Palestine, Russia, Ukraine, and Iran. These seems to be the places that I end up going to. It's tough. Like the farmers are trying as much as they can in all those countries. And all the citizens are like us. They're governed by politicians, but the citizens are like us. They just want to get ahead. These things make it very difficult to run good cattle businesses and good cattle economies. This is a Dinka herdsman in South Sudan with his Dinka cows and his automatic rifle. Similar to the Free State in Texas, they love their cattle and they love their guns, but the body types are different. I think it's probably better that the Free Staters and the Texans keep their shirts on, I think. The value chain, this is important, and this is something I've run into with a couple of projects I've worked on with branded beef, and I think it applies to everything with genetics and all of that as well. Remember I said there's a balance. The customer's not always right, okay? But the customer is the first link in the value chain. Okay? The seed stock producer, the stud breeder, is not the first link in the value chain. We're the last link in the value chain. Because if it's a value chain, you need to pull it. And the stud breeders don't pull the chain, they're at the end of the chain. If the stud breeders were the first link of the chain, we'd have to be pushing a chain, and you can't push a chain. It doesn't work. So we have to identify what that value chain is. Otherwise, it's like a lot of my Wagyu clients, they have a nice Wagyu steak on holiday. They come back, now they want to make their own Wagyu, so they buy embryos and they get calves, and when the first calf's born, they don't know what to do with it. So I think if we treat the value chain like a chain, and you identify who the customer is, what logistics are going to get the product to the customer, how it's going to be processed, how it's going to be fed, how it's going to be bred, that'll quickly tell you what genetics we need to be producing. And I think just a very basic way of establishing that value chain, where maybe in a lot of the fibers and the meat products in agriculture, we've done it the wrong way around. We find something that we like to farm with, and then we push it, instead of identifying all those different links in the chain. How am I for time, by the way? How much time do I have left? You can tell me to stop at any time.
1 hour.
Okay, perfect. See, I asked that just before we got into EBVs. I was trying to find an out, but you guys didn't give me an out. So, another two challenges we've got. The one on the right is recreation, which isn't a huge problem for you guys because Drakensberger aren't really a show breed. You're not breeding them for the show. I don't have an issue with cattle shows, to be honest. As long as they're done correctly and evaluated by real-world cattlemen and selected for functional efficiency. But as you can see, that steer on the right, that's not really industry appropriate or relevant. That's becoming a bit of a game, isn't it? That's just like a poodle. So when we go as far as that, then we're totally divorced from reality. We're totally divorced from what the industry wants, and as seed stock producers, no one's going to take us seriously. I admire what you guys have done in keeping your breed industry relevant and keeping it appropriate. So these are cattle that I would call show ponies. But there's another show going on, and that's the paper tigers. Those are the ones that we select on paper without even looking at them. So I'm going to approach this way. We don't have enough time to assume differently. So I'm going to assume that everyone is measuring everything honestly, accurately, in large numbers, all the time in the same environment. Okay. So once we've assumed that, we can move forward with this talk on EBVs and genomics. My personal philosophy is very similar to Picky. I'm sorry if I get it a little bit wrong, but I think we aligned on that, where when you select for fertility and in all the traits, you select against the negative outliers. So if it's birth weight, you select against high birth weight. You don't select for low birth weight. If it's weaning weight, you select against low weaning weight. You don't select for high weaning weight. If it's milk, you select against low milk. You don't select for high milk. So that's very different to how we market these things. Remember, this is a pretty well-designed machine, this EBV, EPD, now genomically enhanced EBV machine. But it takes the right fuel, so that's the right data going in, because junk in, junk out, so we have to have the right fuel in it. This machine is a Rolls-Royce, so it also takes a license to drive it, okay? And I think there's a lot of people that are publishing these EBVs and that are running this data that might not have a license to drive this machine. Because the minute you start publishing things like trait leaders, it's not subjective anymore, okay? Let me give this analogy. If there's a springbuck in the veld, that's an objective statement. It's there, you can see it. If you're telling me that the springbuck should or shouldn't be in the veld, then that's a subjective statement. A trait leader is a subjective statement. That's not an objective statement. An objective statement is ranking according to a certain trait. A subjective statement is saying that's a trait leader. Okay? Says who? Now, when you get to the marketers, not Fleis and Trial, the other marketers, okay? A lot of the drivers of this Rolls-Royce have also been stuck into the brandy and Coke, where they're marketing top 1% for milk or top 1% for muscle, you know, marketing the outliers. This is not what this machine was designed to do. And I think that, personally, my conviction is that the profit is in the average. We need really, really good average cattle that cover all those bases, enough of everything, not too much of anything, okay? So I encourage you, when next time a marketer is trying to sell you cattle, semen, something comes to you, when you ask them what they've got, say, what's the most average animal that you've got to sell me? Like, what I'm really needing an average bull. Or what's the best average product you can sell me? Because that truly is where the product is. I mean, where the profit is. This graph is going to try and explain to you what I mean by all of this, okay? This shows how well the dollar index is in the Angus breed, which they register about 320,000 calves a year in the US. And a guy from New Zealand, it took a Kiwi to figure this out. He took from 1980 to 2017, he measured how much more profitable Angus steers were in the feedlot, taking into consideration everything from nutritional changes, cost changes, labor changes, inflation rate changes, the whole thing. And he realized that the average Angus steer in the US from 1980 to 2017 made $144 more per steer. That's a massive win. Okay? That shows that this machine was working. Okay? At the same time, between 1980 and 2017, it cost $136 more per year to run a cow. Okay? So if you were a cow-calf producer and someone else was feeding out your steers, you were losing $136 per year per cow so that someone else could make $144. The machine worked, but when you go fast in the wrong direction, then you're really far from home, you know? And I think that what this showed is that the infrastructure is fine, it's how we use that tool. And when we get to that tool, this lectern is a really, really good tool. I would be very nervous giving this talk without this lectern. I wouldn't be able to see my screen, water wouldn't be here, wouldn't be able to hide behind it when you're throwing stuff at me. But now, when I talk about this lectern and how nicely designed it is and how beautiful it is, how nice this yellow wood is, did you notice I didn't mention anything about the saw and the nails and the screws and the waterpas or anything else it took to make this lectern? I think what we've done is we've focused too much on the tools and not enough on the product. Like, surely, if the tools are worth anything, the product has to be good when it comes out in front of us. So yes, there's all kinds of tools. There's phenotype, there's pedigree, there's indexes, there's EBVs, there's genomics. There's all kinds of tools that we can use, okay? But we mustn't lose sight that the product is actually what we're producing. And if we focus all our time on trying to prop up the tools, then we often lose sight of what the product actually is. So with our paper tigers and our show ponies, both of those are a bit of a show. I think, again, the answer, surprise, surprise, is in the middle. This bull is the #1 bull, according to the biggest database index in the world, for dollar profit. That's the overall index. He's the #1 bull in the world in the biggest database for dollar ranch. That means cattle that do well on felt. And he's the top 0.1% for dollar feeders. So that's in the feedlot. So if he was a human, he'd win the 100 meters at the Olympics, then he'd win the sumo wrestling, and then he'd go and win the World Chess Championship afterwards, okay? Firstly, that's all impossible. And secondly, look at him. Like, this is not serious, okay? So I think that, again, maybe top 1% isn't where the answer is. Maybe the answer is somewhere right in the middle. Sorry, unless you guys like him. I mean, it's just my personal thing, but I've looked through the bulls and he wouldn't have been on the sale. The only thing that would have allowed him on the sale is his color, nothing else. But that's the best bull in the world, according to those that know. Okay, just to change gears a little bit quickly, guys, this is a quick picture showing us all the deaths from GMOs in the last 30 years by country. It's not a black and white map, it's a color map. Why I'm showing you this, we have a lot of allies in this industry, and there's a lot of different ways to produce beef. And even in the cattle industry, you've got your high-intensity grazers, you've got your feedlotters, you've got guys who finish on grass, you've got your organic guys, you've got your natural guys. I think we must focus more on our true opposition, which is the messages coming out of the elite cities and maybe other animal proteins, and get together as our ruminant producers because of all those reasons I said earlier, in why this is good for human flourishing and for family farms staying on the land. Same thing with fossil fuels. Our job is to make food. Oil, gas, and coal is the food of food. We can't do this without fossil fuels. So the more this gets demonized, the harder it makes it for us to produce food. This is an example from the US that I sometimes use, and basically, to sum it up, there's Manhattan, New York, massive city, 10+ million people, and Manhattan, Kansas, small little town with a lot of big feedlots, okay? And the people in New York hate the idea that cattle are fed in confinement for the last part of their lives. They're grazing, they're not grazing, they're eating a total mixed ration. There's no green grass and big trees for them to be under. There's artificial shelter for them. They're not being sheltered by trees. The water they're drinking is piped into troughs. They're not drinking in streams or lakes or ponds or dams. And they've got these pen riders that come through on four-wheelers or on horses and chase them up twice a day to see if they're healthy or not, okay? And this is frowned upon by Manhattan, New York. They don't like the whole feedlot idea. In Manhattan, New York, We've got millions and millions of people living on top of each other. They're not hunting for deer or catching fish or collecting berries or nuts. They're eating a total mixed ration at the pizza place on the corner of each block. These guys, they're not lying under trees. They've got air conditioning to keep them cool in summer and hot in the winter. They're also getting chased up about twice a day by dentists and doctors and physios, making sure that they're healthy and all right, and yet they despise the idea of feedlots, even though they choose to live in a human feedlot themselves. A lot of what gets thrown at us is absolute nonsense, and I think they just need to hear a little bit of pushback every now and again. My grandfather, he taught me that if I'm with a new bunch of people, I must avoid 3 topics: religion, politics, and sex. Okay, so we won't talk about sex because it's actually a little bit boring. So we're going to just stick quickly to religion and politics and the opportunities that those challenges present in our industry. On the top left, you'll see a typical South African farm that's got security around it. When law and order wasn't going to take care of farmers themselves, an unbelievable security industry popped up in South Africa, probably more dynamic than anywhere else in the world in terms of infrastructure. So that was a challenge that became an opportunity. Top right, this is in India, 320 million cattle in India, but most of the Indian states, the only 2 that allow cattle slaughter, so a lot of the others, the males just get turned loose onto the streets, and the cull cows or the dry cows get turned loose onto the streets. And those cattle are eating food that could be for humans, okay? Also 1.3 billion people there. So now cattle are sacred because of the Hindu faith. But fortunately, they found an illegal but accepted route to sell their beef to Bangladesh. And even though cows are sacred, I think the rupee is more sacred in India. So they've managed to find an exit for those cattle, and it's become a massive trade. So again, a challenge that became an opportunity. Middle East, this is a big ship out of Brazil. There's ships there that can take up to 25,000 head. Because the Middle East has such a demand for red meat at the end of Ramadan during Eid, they need these big ships to take them all of these cattle. Big challenge became a big opportunity. And these opportunities, I know there are already ships taking livestock from South Africa to the Middle East and to the Indian Ocean countries. This is going to become more and more because we're more geographically convenient. East Africa and South Africa is than South America. Any quick questions before I run away with any of this? Okay, so another 2 challenges which are becoming less of a challenge than when I started addressing these was the lab-grown meat. So essentially this is meat that DNA's the same as our product that's grown in labs, and a similar eating experience as what you'd get from our cattle. The 2 issues they ran into there, the one is it's too expensive. No serious people could afford it. The second thing is the amount of energy that it would take to run the labs to grow this beef at any scale. There isn't a power grid in the world that could take it. You know, it's funny, it's come into existence at a similar time to artificial intelligence, which also needs a whole lot of electricity to run all those supercomputers. So something's going to give, and unfortunately this lab-grown meat is going to struggle to get a foothold now because of those 2 reasons. The other one is the meatless burger, so it's a vegetarian-based burger that they've developed, and like I said, it's been rejected in the US. I tried it, because I can't talk negatively about something that I haven't tried. What they did there was amazing. It's the first time ever in the history of food that they've been able to develop a food that it's the trifecta. They hit the 3 big things. It's expensive, it doesn't taste good, and it isn't good for you. No other food has ever been able to do all 3 of those things. and the population rejected it. So I'm grateful that that trial obviously didn't really work. And then the other thing that came to light during that time was, I'm all for someone being a vegetarian or a vegan. It really doesn't bother me whatsoever. What bothers me if their reason is a moral reason. Like if they say, well, how could you kill animals in order to eat for yourself? And remember we talked about the pampas down in Argentina. When they plowed up that pampas and they turned it into a monoculture soybeans for China, they killed everything. It killed worms, and it killed foxes, and it killed deer, and it killed all the rodents and the birds. There was nothing left after they did that. And that's millions and millions of hectares. So, yeah, these vegans are savages. You must be careful of them, people. I think with a lot of these discussions, there's just not enough nuance and context. On every one of these topics, there's a discussion to be had, and none of it works in 30 seconds. I think what we need to maybe get used to is having long conversations to try and figure out where the truth is, and it's usually going to be somewhere in the middle of these things. Does the planet need more cows or less cows? Well, it needs more cows if they're managed appropriately, right? Or it needs less cows if they're not managed correctly. I mean, there's nuance there. Do we need more energy or less energy? Well, we need more energy because more people will flourish if there's more energy. But if energy is not used correctly, then we need less energy. It's these pictures I've put up here. It's if you asked me if I played sport when I was at university, and I said yes, that doesn't really tell you anything, does it? I mean, I could have been a bare knuckle boxer, or I could have done lawn bowls. They're both sports, so I think we need some context around this. Of course, we need more energy because more energy makes more people rich. And wealthy people care about the environment. Someone who doesn't earn up to, say, $5,000 a year, they can't care about the environment. There's no way you could get them to care about pollution or erosion or clean water and clean air. Their hierarchy of needs is different. All our hierarchy of needs is different. We need somewhere to sleep, we need something to eat, we need someone to sleep with. That is the hierarchy of needs. Someone who's earning less than $5,000 a year truly does not care how clean the water is in the river. So more energy allows for more people to become wealthy quicker. More cows allows for us to manage our environment better if done correctly. So we need context and nuance with all of this. The one thing I do reject is the whole idea that we need minimal human impact, as though we're not part of the environment, that we're not like part of nature. We're a big part of nature. We are the only part of nature that actually cares about the rest of nature. Now, we've made amazing mistakes, and we've really ruined a lot of things in the short term, but there seems to be a swing back to where people really care about the environment. And if you don't believe me, think about this, okay? If you really want to see that all these philosophies actually work, that people that have private property and have some wealth, and how good that is for the environment, okay? Drive from Cape Town to Beitbridge and see how beautiful that environment and climate is, and how well grassed it is, and how well the veld is taken care of, okay? And then drive from Beitbridge to Cairo and see the difference between those two. People who own their properties and have some wealth are amazing for the environment. This is a map of the grasslands. So they all have different names. In Africa it's veld or savanna, and then the prairies in North America, pampas in South America, the downs in Australia, or the steppes in Europe and Asia. That's about 40 to 50%, let's call it 45% of the world's landmass is grasslands, where you can't grow cabbages, you can't grow lettuce, you can't grow apples. It's just grassland, and there's very few things you can do with it. Okay? You can either leave it. There are people buying up land in North America and Europe where they just leave it, which is chaos, because that veld rots, becomes moribund, and then it releases all kinds of poisonous gases. Okay, so that's not good for the environment, and you're getting no money out of it, or no product out of it. You can let it grow and then burn it. I mean, if you drive to Joburg at this time of the year, you see that haze above Joburg from burning firewood. A lot of pollution comes from just burning for the sake of burning. You're not getting any product back from it. Or you can graze it. And you graze it and you get a nutritious product that is so good for human flourishing. And through that, you're managing that environment so well. So it's quite logical. I mean, the third option is obviously the best option to do with it. Or you could build golf courses. But that's even more boring than sex. You know, if all the golf courses in the world were put together, it would be a country the size of Belgium. Can you believe how boring that country would be? I think the one thing that we do in agriculture not so well is succession and estate planning. And I think we need to do better at this as an industry. You know, the whole idea of, I must get this right because of the terminology, but the first child born without a willy, with a willy, gets the farm. The next child born without a willy gets an insurance policy. And then the next ones just have to make a plan. I think that we have to do better than this. This is archaic, and there are a lot of resources out there to help with this. And this is one area of agriculture and under human capital we can do to better at. Just wrapping up some of this data. So top 5 countries by cattle inventory. That's India, Brazil, China, USA, and Ethiopia. Every country in the world either has cattle, eats beef, or does both. And you can do the same with milk. So it's a global industry. This is not something that's niche. It's in every single area of the world. 60% of the world's cattle are in those top five cattle countries. That's quite centralized. So out of 225 countries and territories, only 5 of them hold 60% of the world's cattle. I don't know if it's good or bad, but that is. What is interesting is that even though the US is only 4th in terms of inventory, it's 1st in terms of beef production. And this is the US, Canadian, South African, Argentinian, Brazilian, Australian, New Zealand way of producing beef is certainly showing to be way more efficient than the others, where with less product we can produce more output, and that's where those efficiencies become good. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're going to start getting the practical side of this. We're going to bring 4 heifers in, and we'll discuss them, and then we'll bring a cow and a calf in and discuss her, and then we'll bring a bull in and discuss him. So at this point, it's probably better that we get the lectern out, or we're going to pull it back. Okay, perfect, thank you. Are there any questions while we wait for the cattle, or are you guys fine? Okay. You can ask the questions in Afrikaans if you want, or ungasibuza nangesiXhosa. No, okay. is in here, and just a basic philosophy around evaluating livestock for functional efficiency. So we need cattle to do a few basic things. They've got to eat, they've got to walk, and they've got to reproduce. Okay? So how do we evaluate these things? So for eating, we need cattle to have a wide muzzle and a strong jaw. Okay? Width of muzzle and strong jaw is important for foraging, for eating grass. Okay? The wider the muzzle, the stronger the jaw, the more grass they get with each bite. From a skeletal strength and width standpoint, the width of an animal's muzzle and the width between the pin bones is identical. Okay, so it's an indicator of skeletal width all the way through. And then also you need a jaw where the teeth are hitting the dental plate at the right place. So avoiding the parrot mouths or the undershot jaw and the monkey jaw or the overshot jaw. Then we need cattle to be able to walk. So locomotion, athleticism, flexibility. When you think of how much your cattle have to travel in order to get water and food, foot and leg structure becomes extremely important, but also to hold that body up. We need the right angles and the right joints and the right amount of bone in order to hold that body up. And then we need cattle to reproduce. So we're going to look at the sexual traits. So that's the vulva, udder on the females, the secondary sexual traits, the femininity through their neck, head, and shoulder, the fleshing ability over their rib cages. And when we get to the bull later, we'll look at the testicles, at the sheath, and then those secondary sexual traits being the muscularity in his neck, that muscle shape and tone that he possesses. Remember now, when you're looking at these cattle, the profit traits are adaptability, functional efficiency, fertility, and longevity. Okay, so how do we measure adaptability? These cattle, you can see they belong in this environment, okay? They're appropriate in their body type and frame. They've got the right kind of hair where they can grow some hair in winter when it gets cold, and they'll slick off very well in summer. And they're not high maintenance cattle. Okay, they're not going to take a lot of energy in order for them to keep reproducing. Adaptability, like we said earlier, and I'm sorry if I sound like a stuck record, but it's so important. This is the gateway trait. Nothing happens if animals aren't adapted. Okay. Functional efficiency, like we explained earlier in some detail. Fertility, so remember when we're evaluating cattle, feminine females that are easy fleshing are fertile, okay? And then longevity. So how do we measure longevity in cattle? It's foot and leg structure and it's skeletal structure. So let's, I'll pull her out and we'll have a look at her feet. Guys, the skeletal structure of an animal, it's so essential that we have loose skeletons, relaxed spines, okay? That whole idea of tightening up a spine where it's dead level on the stand, often when it moves, it roaches up on the spine. If you think of all your cows at home, your teenage cows that are very productive are not roached up in the spine. They've got a little bit of softness and flexibility in their spines. And that just allows animals to be comfortable and productive for a very long time. Angle of shoulder is so important. So from the top of the shoulder down to the point of the shoulder, you want a nice 45-degree angle. Like I'm sure a lot of you have had dealt with horses. If you've got a straight shoulder, what happens? The horse can't move. Okay, it's very limited in its gait. The other thing with a straight shoulder is that it puts too much pressure on the knee joint and it puts too much pressure on the pasterns. And immediately what happens then is you get a curling toe. Okay, the toes start curling. She's got very good uniform toes. She's symmetrical in her toes, and she's got a good-sized foot. Small little feet on a big body, you don't get longevity from that. You need a good-sized foot relative to the body, okay? The shape of the bone is so important. Remember, we're not in the ivory business, we're in the beef business. So we don't need elephant legs. We just need legs that are appropriate to the body of the animal. There are a lot of breeds that are chasing maximum bone. Remember what we said earlier, growth hormones propagate bone, widthwise and lengthwise. And the fertile cattle will always have a flatter bone, bit of a concave bone, and they'll have clean joints. The big jointed, big bone cattle aren't going to be able to maintain themselves in order to be fertile for a long time. The angle of the hip and rump and hind leg, so we certainly need some angle from hips to pins, 6 degrees or more. And the reason for that is it opens up the pelvic opening. When you've got a very flat rump, you've got a closed pelvic opening. It makes it more difficult at calving time, but it also makes it more difficult for the cow to cleanse her afterbirth once she's calved. Getting back to the shoulder, another reason why that shoulder is so important to have angle on it is when a cow's calved and is calving, the calf presents itself feet first, so you need flexibility through the shoulder for that calf to be able to lean forward. When a calf is too bold or too straight in its shoulder, that's when often they get jammed, especially there through the hips. Remember what I said about feet? Feet are a product of the upper skeleton. Like I've calved many thousand calves. They're not born with curling toes and they're not born with flat heels. So what would cause a flat heel is when there's too much pressure from the skeleton at the wrong angle coming down, and it causes the animal to have too much weight on his heel and the feet grow out. So how do we correct that on the hind leg? Is to have a hind leg that's got some angle to the hock, a clean hock, but with some angle to it, some flexibility and athleticism on that hock, and some comfort. We have to have cushion in our pasterns. A very rigid pastern is incredibly uncomfortable for cattle, and that's when laminitis creeps in, and they'll often go lame at that point. Too sickle or too much shape or hook to that hock can cause wear on the foot and create a little bit of a shallow heel and long toes, but that's still preferred to it being too straight. If you don't have any angle on that hind leg, that's often caused by a hip to pin that's too flat, then you'll have a smaller foot with curling toes, and that really affects longevity the worst. Now, when evaluating these cattle, it's important to know that quality cattle come in all different shapes and sizes and colors, okay? So here, like when evaluating them, we've got black solid cattle, and the vast majority of them are going to be horned. It's very easy to make black cows. It's easy to make horned cattle. It's easy to make red ones and white ones and polled ones, big ones and little ones. So what makes cattle good is those function efficient profit traits that I was talking about earlier. It's not the easy things to breed for, like size and color and polledness. Now the next thing is, before you even go into evaluating these cattle, you've got to decide whether your objectives and your resources and your environment even align with the type of cattle that you're working with, okay? So between these 4 cattle, you can see from where you are, I'm sure, that there's differences in rib shape and there's differences in fleshing ability on the animal's ribs, correct? Okay. That rib shape is essential for rumen function. In order for that rumen to have maximum capacity, for the organs to be in there, we need that extra rumen function. Now, look at the cattle with that extra rumen function. They've also got soft fleshing over their ribs. Okay, there's easy fleshing, high inherent body condition. Look at that heifer there, extremely soft over her ribs. And then when you look at the lower rib shape, there's like a dewdrop shape lower rib sweep. A lot of our terminal European breeds are more cylindrical through that middle. They don't have that sweep in their lower rib shape. And that's often the differentiator between our terminal cattle and our maternal cattle, okay? Terminal cattle have a lot of other things in common. And there's a place for these cattle as long as we do terminate the offspring. They tend to have straighter shoulders because with terminal cattle, we're breeding maximum ribeye, maximum muscle over the top. And in order to get all that ribeye in, we keep pushing that shoulder forward, okay? What else do a lot of terminal cattle have? They get quite level from hip to pin. They get quite straight in their hind legs. And their ribs on the females point straight down. Their ribs don't point back into their udder. So when you're analyzing, here's a good example of that. This 44D heifer, her ribs are pointing back into her flank. They're not pointing straight down. And a hormonally balanced female, the ribs will always point back towards the flank. When you look at these cattle from behind, pin width in females is very, very important. Okay, you want that pelvic opening from a pin width standpoint, and you need the angle from the hip to the pin bone to come down there. Softness of flank. So we see where the flank is less, right? Now, there have been prominent South African cattlemen who have said it's irrelevant. Why do you need softness of flank, or why do you need a deep flank? Well, you don't need it, but it's an indicator of what's going on in the body. When you start getting cattle with tight flanks, they tend to be leaner, later maturing cattle that aren't easy fleshing. Your deeper flank cattle, the fuller flank cattle, are the cattle that are usually easier fleshing and earlier maturing. The length of skull, the length of the animal's head is going to indicate several things. And most of it's going to be maturity pattern. So the longer the skull, the larger her frame, the slightly later maturing. When you start getting it extremely narrow, remember your females are going to have much more narrow skulls than your bulls. We'll bring the bull in later. That's just sexual dimorphism. When they get too narrow in the muzzle and too narrow between the eyes and a little longer, then you start getting your leaner phenotypes. Again, if you've dealt with horses, you'll know this. The positioning of the eye on the skull, the further down the skull the eye is, the kinder it is, the bigger it is, and the more well set it is. You're going to have a more fertile animal. You're going to have a quieter disposition animal. You're going to have an animal that fleshes a lot easier. When that eye gets smaller and moves up the skull, like a horse, you get a wild animal that's leaner and later maturing. All these traits keep correlating, and it's not causation, but it's correlation. They all move into the same direction, and that is a direction of functional efficiency. Like we mentioned earlier, this throat latch, the skin under the chin, that dewlap, this bit of skin is so important for dissipating heat, and it's good for fleshing ability. When you tighten that throat up and you take the throat latch out, it's very hard to put condition on cows once you take that throat latch out. These things correlate in an amazing way. The sternum, the chest, keeping chest in cattle is very important in terms of where the sternum comes out. You want it to shoot out and then up. When you take that sternum away, you're losing that chest cavity and that performance. Now, you want that skin fold to come over that brisket, and you want like an ironed or pleated skin fold to come over it to show us functional efficiency, but you do want that sternum to come out and then up. A lot of breeds have taken the chest out of their cattle, and that's taking the engine out of the machine. When you get behind these cattle or in front of them, the widest part of a functionally efficient female is going to be that upper rib cage, that centrally upper rib cage. So round about there is going to be the widest part of a functionally efficient female. The bulls, it's a similar place in the body, but just a little bit lower down. That's the widest part of that bull. Often you look at an animal and you don't like it and you don't know why, and you get behind it and the hips are the most prominent, or the thigh of the bull is the most prominent and the widest, and that shows you that there's something out of balance there. They're not functionally efficient. They're missing some balance. That becomes a really strong telltale sign. Because these are performance cattle, because we do need them to perform, we have to have chest, floor, and base width. So when the cattle come towards you, they need to be square at the ground, and you need some width there. And when they walk away from you, you need some width at the base there as well, because that's the true skeletal width, is at the ground. You'll find a lot of cattle are quite wide between the hips. It can even be wide at the shoulders, and they get very narrow at their feet. They're giving up a lot of actual true performance there. I think for me personally, one of the biggest deal breakers in cattle is when the shoulder doesn't blend into the forerib smoothly. And they get, I think the South African word is the best to describe this, that devil's grip. Because if you don't have heart girth and forerib, you're losing all your rumen function. And one of the ways in which you can lose it the quickest is there are a lot of breeds that want to pick that neck up out of the top of the shoulders at an extreme angle. And it's just geometry. When you pick that neck up extremely high, you're gonna compromise that heart girth and forerib. When the neck doesn't go up at all, when it's too level with the shoulders, you get a lot of chest floor, but you get a straight shoulder, and then you lose your flexibility. So again, the answer's in the middle. You want a neck that comes out of the top of the shoulders at a good enough angle to make it flexible, but also it doesn't need to come up like a horse's neck, because then you're going to get a tighter heart girth and a more narrow chest. Muscle on females, you really don't want too much muscle shape and tone. What a female truly needs to be a dairy cow that's full. They must just look like a dairy cow, but just must be full-bodied. So the minute you start getting a crease in the muscle and a little bit too much tone in the muscle, you start losing out on the actual femininity and hormonal balance in the females. And I think that when it comes to bulls, again, it's going to be the opposite. We want some muscle shape and some tone to those bulls to show the testosterone on it. Just out of interest, not that it plays too heavily into this market, but marbling in cattle, a lot of these traits apply to marbling too. When you've got a more refined pole, on the top, the ridge of the animal, when it's more refined, when the hide is very silky, when the ears are waxy and the tail's waxy, when the bone is concave, almost like a Jersey cow where the bone is concave and then there's a little small joint and it's concave again. These are all indicators of high marbling. So your very productive, functionally efficient females tend to have all of those traits too. And that's why I'm saying, if your cattle are functionally efficient and bred for reproduction, things like butterfat in the milk, which correlates to marbling in beef, those things are already set in, not in an extreme way, but in a functional enough way for that. You guys will know as good as anyone, your females that shed first, that get rid of their hair early on in the spring, they're going to be your most fertile animals. Because what happens is the light hits the pituitary gland just behind the head, and it starts telling the body that the days are getting longer, and then the females start shedding off their hair. The females that are holding hair the longest, they tend to be your less fertile animals, and the females that are shedding that hair the quickest, they're going to be your most fertile animals. Well, this time of year it doesn't matter, because we're almost at the middle of the year, so they're going to be getting hair on them at this point. But when you start looking in the spring, your smoothest females, the ones that get smoothest the quickest, those are the most functional, and they're going to be the most fertile. And guys, fat is important. I can't stress this enough. You'll see even between these females, I know none of these have been on diet because of the event that we're at, but there's a difference in the fleshing ability of these females, and it really correlates with the shape of their skulls, it correlates with the shape of their rib cages and their maturity pattern, but keeping them fleshy is really, really important. If I can just pull this number 44A aside here. I don't know who the breeder of this female is, but they're going to buy me a tequila tonight. This is a beautifully balanced, functionally efficient female. Can you see how maternal and feminine she is in her skull? How smooth she is in her shoulder, how flat she is in her neck, how big and prominent she is in her center body, how relaxed she is in her spine. She's still strong in her spine, but she's relaxed in that spine. She's full, but she doesn't have extreme muscle shape. She's deep in her flank, beautiful foot and bone structure, to this female, and she's just a lady. She's all lady, tremendous, the way she transfers from her muzzle and jaw all the way back into her hindquarter. She's symmetric and balanced, and already you can see how she progressively gets more powerful as she goes back into that hip and hindquarter. Yeah, so I'm not sure the background on this female, but I think this is a very good prototype female for what we need to be striving for fertile, functional females with longevity that are functionally efficient. And look at her feet. Beautiful feet. They're good size compared to her body. The toes are symmetrical. She's got some heel depth. And then the bone is adequate. Not too much, not too little, just the right amount of bone. And then you see that shape to her lower rib cage. Got that beautiful sweep to her rib at the bottom there to show us how maternal she is. And she's moderate. She's not a big heifer, but she's massive. She's wide through her chest. She's wide at her base. So there's a lot of performance in this heifer, but in a very practical package. Can we bring the cow and calf in, if we can move these out? And are there any questions on the heifers, guys? Okay, you'll see this cow is very similar to the heifer we just pointed out. Very, very similar type and kind. Just while she stands there, I just want to give an anecdote of something that happened to me maybe 10 years ago now, that really made me aware of the way in which we select cattle and some of the mistakes that we make. I took an animal scientist from Iowa to Kenya with me, and we were at a boron herd called Old Pejeta up in the near Nanyuki in Kenya, under Mount Kenya, and they run about 6,000 boron cows there. And when we got to the bulls, there were about 120 bulls, all in one group, from 3 years old to about 15 years old. And the feet, the testicles, the sheaths, the body type, the maturity pattern of these bulls was so similar. And the animal scientist from Iowa who actually worked on the 50K DNA SNP for Angus in the US, he said to the manager who flew in a Piper Cub, he had flip-flops on and rugby shorts and a check shirt with maybe 1 or 2 buttons too many undone, and an army hat. And he said to him, this is an amazing group of bulls. What selection tools are you using to select these bulls? And this guy said to him, we dip them every couple of weeks for parasites. And when they come out of the dip, we hold them in that holding pen. And anything that doesn't look like the others gets kicked out. That was the philosophy, okay? And the guy said to me, maybe we've overcomplicated the way we select cattle. And I said, well, hallelujah, that's why I brought you here. But this cow, here's a cow for me that just shows that philosophy of enough of everything, but not too much of anything. Extremely feminine and maternal, but still has mass, the right amount of muscle for a female without being coarse. Extremely good on her feet and legs. What I like about this cow is her udder quality. Now, udder quality in beef cattle is just as important as anything else. She's got a very level udder floor. Her udder ligaments are tucked up above the hock. This is longevity. Her teats are the right shape and size, and they're all spaced correctly. She's got very good fore-udder attachment. So fore-udder attaches into the body wall nice and snugly. Fore-udders in a lot of beef breeds and beef cattle, they get a little compromised and we get quite a big angle on them. Remember, the rear udder is also so important too. When you get behind her, she's got some height and width in her rear udder. Now remember, 60% of a cow's milk comes from the 2 rear quarters. So we've got to get height and width in that rear udder. And I think these practical functional udders, this is longevity. You know, this is what keeps these cows going for a long time. What is amazing is if you breed cattle for reproduction first and functional efficiency, your udders are fine. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to select for udders if you do that. I think cattle naturally had very good udders. The cattle with the worst udders in the world are the ones that have been bred for something other than reproduction. When you go too much on bone, too much on size, too much on performance and weight, too much on muscle, that's when the udder falls apart. The other thing I realized when I was working in Bavaria, in Munich, with the Simmental Fleckviehs, is the size of the bone of the cow and the udder, the teat size, correlate almost 100%. Like if you saw a cow with huge bone, she was going to have big teats. If you've got fine little bone, she'd have fine little teats. So that's, again, where we have to bring it back towards the middle. And look at the job she's doing on this heifer calf. I mean, she's just clipped a coupon that's just like herself. Look, and she's reproduced herself beautifully. There's a lot of fleshing on this female. You know, there's not a lot of muscle shape and tone, but she's full-bodied, and she's so easy fleshing. And on her, you see even better the angle of her ribs pointing back into her udder. Can you guys see that? How the ribs point back towards the udder. And again, exceptional foot quality on this female. Did you see what I meant about the relaxed spine, guys? See how flexible she is in her spine? Not perfectly. If you put a waterpass on there, it's not going to sit perfect. It's still strong though. It's a strong spine, but it's got some flexibility and softness to it. This is an exquisite beef cow. Again, I don't know whose it is, but I'm getting a tequila, soda, and lime from you later for that. Okay, should we bring that the bull in? Are there any questions on the cow and calf? Oh, not yet. So with the bull, I thought this was a really good example to show some of the attributes we were talking about earlier. He's masculine, he's massive, and he's muscular. Okay, so he fills all of that criteria really, really well. Extremely good in his skull and in his muzzle and in his jaw. You see he's got a good prominent jaw within his muzzle, well set eye. He's masculine. There's a lot of testosterone in this bull. You see it in his muscle shape and tone. You see it in his testicle size, shape, and suspension. Remember with the udders, we were saying we wanted those udders to be tucked up above the hock. And I believe in equity. If the girls have to do it, the boys have to do it. Those testicles need to be above the hocks just for purposes of injury, but also just to keep that the scrotum, the temperature of the scrotum regulated. We need to keep that scrotal neck short. You'll often see unadapted cattle will have a very long scrotal neck, and it's because there's too much heat and humidity for them to thermoregulate their testicles correctly. Two evenly sized and evenly shaped testicles, like this bull's got. Very practical sheath. He's not too tight. He's got more than enough leather, but it's still tidy and practical and manageable. Nice small prepuce opening. Massive center body. Huge rib shape on this bull. And the only way you can put that much ribeye and that much loin and that much rump on a bull is if he's got that upper rib shape that he has. So if you look at, you guys can see better from up high, massive over his top. And then he's got that genuine width through his chest and at his base. So it's showing you genuine skeletal width. And now you see the angle of his shoulder to the top of his shoulder, the point of his shoulder. Nice 45-degree angle. Another angle back to his knee, so he's got flexibility his knee so he can move. And look at the shape of his feet. Just really, really good, well-shaped feet on this bull. That muscle on his forearm indicates that this bull's truly muscular. He's not just full. And this neck muscle is essential. Because steers, oxen don't have neck muscle. A lot of them have got muscle on their rumps, they've got muscle over their tops, but testosterone puts muscle in the neck, and that's a really, really good indicator of hormonal balance as well. He's easy fleshing. I mean, this bull's nice and easy fleshing, but you can still see the shape of his muscle. So with our bulls, we want to see that true muscle shape and tone with a bit of a crease in that hindquarter, that shape on that forearm, but he's still not hard on his ribs. My least favorite term in the Afrikaans language is kliphard. Whoever came up with that saying in the cattle business needs, yeah, Picky, come on, man. Goodness, how dare you. It needs to be put on trial, because that is not what we need in the industry. We need true muscle shape, but with some softness over the rib cage. And again, you see that sweep to his lower rib cage. Maternal cattle have got that. That stifle joint, that a skilpadspier, is that right? A prominent stifle joint will and muscle over that stifle joint will show us true muscle shape as well. And then you guys see his happy lines. You'll probably see him better in the light there. Turn him around. You see just on his ribs, he's got those horizontal happy lines. Cattle get that when they're functionally efficient. It looks like they've gone through a fence. You see those happy lines? It looks like he got scratched through a fence, and that just shows that this bull, see there, just on his rib cage. That just shows that he's functionally efficient. What a lot of popular breeds have done is they've tightened, like I said, that throat latch up under the jaw. It's so important that we keep the dewlap and the throat latch on these cattle, especially in the environment that we're in. Here's a good example of a bull that can pick his head up, but not so high that he's compromised in his heart girth. You see how smoothly he goes from his shoulder back into his forerib. Transitions like beautifully back there, and that indicates huge forerib and a big heart girth. I was telling the guys earlier, there's a sheep farmer in Australia that I follow quite carefully. He started a breed called Australian White. And for him, the best indicator of how well muscled his sheep were is he just puts a rope around their neck and he measures that rope. And that tells him whether the sheep have got muscle, true muscle or not. You know, you're going to have quite a big rope to get around this bull's neck. And even though, this is a heavy bull, and even though he's got all that meat on him, he's not tall. He's high performing in a moderate package, and yet he moves that body around incredibly well. He's an athlete, and that flexibility is totally essential for longevity of these cattle, for functional efficiency, and just for them to be able to breed females practically and functionally. One thing we didn't touch on with that female, the heifer I really liked, and the cow that really liked, and this bull, you see how long their tails are? Maternal cattle have long tails. When you start shortening the tails of these cattle, you're running into a more terminal type of body type. When you go into those herdsmen up, like the Maasai and in Kenya and Tanzania, and then you go up into the Sudan, Ethiopia, Cameroon, those Fulani herdsmen, they all select their cattle based on length of tail. And they're not wrong. Like maternal cattle have got really, really long tails. That's just balance. That's symmetry. I mean, that's a beef bull that is carrying a lot of muscle, but has got all the maternal attributes that you could attribute to him as well. There's something in our industry where we expect the cattle to place their hind foot where their front foot is when they were moving. And there's nothing wrong with it. That's not a bad thing at all. But I think for cattle to be functionally efficient, they don't have to do that. For me, it's more important that they're comfortable in their joints, that they've got some angle in their joints, that their joints are clean, that they've got cushion in their pasterns. That's longevity. Because if you look in nature, with all the wild ruminants, there's a lot of variation in where they place their feet when they move, but they've all just got flexibility. And I think flexibility in these animals is the key. I don't think we need to try and find problems where there aren't any problems. I think it's complicated enough to make a good animal. So let's just focus on stuff that actually means something. Is there anything else on this bull or on any other subject at all that there might be questions on? Because I might have exhausted you guys. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time and attention, and I've enjoyed chatting to you guys. If there's any reason for you to want to get hold of me, if there anything you need more information on or help with, the society, Melissa's got all that information to give to you guys. Any complaints you can send to Paki. Okay, thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, from the society side, PJ, thank you very much. It was well appreciated. I think there's going to be quite a lot of questions afterwards and discussion. So something small from our side. Thank you very much for your time, and we really appreciate that. So thank you.